Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the show. Today in the studio, I had David Sutcliffe. He might be a familiar face to some of you watching if you're familiar with the Hollywood show Gilmore Girls, and he is all the way from that world into the therapist chair these days. David's a fascinating man with a lot of insight and a lot of life experience. You imagine living that superstardom and money and success to leave that behind in the pursuit of something that is inherently more meaningful. So we talk all about therapy. You know, what is therapy? Why is it important for men and women? What are some of the mistakes that people make about therapy? What is Andrew Tate like in real life? Because David flew over to Romania very shortly after Tate got let out of prison to do some psychotherapy on Andrew Tate himself. So it's a fascinating conversation. This one is full of gems of wisdom and deep insights about the way our minds work and what we can do to harness more control and radical responsibility in our day-to-day lives. So without further ado, Mr. David Sutcliffe. David Sutcliffe, welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you for joining me in the studio. I'm looking forward to this one.
Happy to be here.
As I was telling you off air, as an English lad growing up in the Northwest, I didn't know much about Gilmore Girls. I didn't know much about Hollywood. You've got quite a fascinating story from that world into like this seat of the therapist now, working on yourself, helping others work on themselves. Take me on that journey a little bit.
Well, I'll try to give you the condensed version of it. You know, I got out to LA, got success as an actor, fortunately became known for Gilmore Girls and a few other things. And it was great. You know, I was living the dream. I got everything that I wanted, more than I ever thought that I would achieve. But classic story, I still felt unfulfilled, unhappy, something was missing. And I went searching and tried a lot of different kinds of therapy, and then finally found this therapy called core energetics, which was it's a somatic type of therapy. And traditional talk therapy was useful in terms of helping me understand what I call like the math of my problem. It helped me map the territory of my psyche in terms of understanding what happened to me in my past and then seeing how that was playing out in my life now as an adult, which was helpful. But I knew intuitively that I needed to feel, that I couldn't feel my feelings. And core energetics, which is somatic, meaning of the body, has all these techniques and a philosophy that really allowed me to get into my feelings. It's very physical. So there's movement and hitting and punching and kicking. And I was also a former athlete, so that it kind of fit for me, and it was really exciting. And then all of these feelings and emotions and thoughts came out of me that shocked me. And that idea that there were things inside me that I didn't know or understand that were in some way governing my life was a revelation. And I became fascinated with it. In particular, one teacher, a woman named Anne Bradney, her philosophy and her techniques and how she worked with groups. And I ended up going to her training program, and then I graduated. I was still acting, and just over time, the therapy just started to take precedent. I was more interested, more passionate about it. And, you know, it was a hard decision to leave my acting career behind because, of course, it was the source of my identity and also, you know, it's my financial well-being was tied to that. But I got into acting because that's what I wanted to do. I was following my passion. Everybody thought I was crazy, and that worked out. So I just continued on, like doing what I wanted to do, following the thing that I was interested in, and that's sort of how I lived my life. And so that led me here.
And it probably seems to the outside world looking in that was another crazy decision. Like originally, the goal of becoming someone known in Hollywood is crazy because 1% probably break through that.
Yeah.
But then to leave it is even more crazy because you're leaving behind everything else. The money and the safety, the comfort, the identity, the prestige. It reminds me of a quote because you said you got everything you wanted and more. And there's that idea that success is getting what you want and happiness is wanting what you get. So you got everything you wanted.
Yeah.
Or maybe didn't want what you got, and now you're on a more meaningful path. Is that safe to say?
I think so. I'm just following my impulses. I don't think about it too much. I just follow the thing that I'm interested in. And Bashar has this philosophy. I don't know if you know Bashar, but he's a channeler, and he's just follow your highest excitement all the way to the end. And that's all I'm doing. I'm just doing what it is that I'm interested in. And in this work, it's not that I've like found nirvana or found my true thing. I had a lot of fun acting. I mean, it was amazing. I had some incredible experiences, and but once I got to, I don't want to say I got to the top of the mountain. I don't know if I got to the top of the mountain, but I got somewhere. I accomplished something, and the mystery of it kind of dissipated a little bit. It became just ordinary. And I was in search of something else to conquer. It had less fascination for me. And so this just became the next thing that I was interested in. Maybe there'll be something else in 5 years from now. So that's kind of how I think about things. I'm just following what interests me, following my excitement, and doing what I love to do. This work is very gratifying. It is nice to be able to help people, to have an impact. But I don't really do it for that reason. I do it for me. I like it. I enjoy it. It's creative. It's interesting. It's relational. Which I think is some people might think that's a contradiction. But I teach a lot of therapists and coaches, and I always say to them, you have to be doing it for you.
Right.
Like if you're not getting something out of it, your clients aren't getting something out of it. If you're sacrificing yourself for them, that's not helpful. So it's because people put things on it because you're a healer, but it's just another way that I express myself.
I'm glad you said that, because I think sometimes, as the healer archetype, it's supposed to just be purely altruistic. And there's something in it for us too. Like, the reason we give to charity is because we might really want to support a cause, but it also makes us feel like a good person. And that's okay. Like, you can have both. You said you're kind of following more of a feeling these days than over intellectualizing things and thinking about it. And that's something that I think a lot of people do. I think, the modern human is very stuck in the head, disconnected from the somatic, disconnected from the body. Maybe in particular, men. How do you think more traditional therapy could be failing men in particular?
I mean, that's a big question. Well, the first thing is that most therapists are women. 80% of therapists are women. My main teacher was a woman, and I learned a lot from her, and I'm really grateful to her. So it's not that a man can't go see a woman and not have an amazing experience and get great results. However, just like as a man has a bias, a woman has a bias. So there's certain things you can't get there. And so I think the way therapy fails men is they unconsciously project onto men a kind of female centric way of thinking about their psyche and thinking about what they need. And I think it's important for men to understand their emotions and the mechanism of their psyche, and to get in touch with their pain particularly and their fear, and understand that part of them. However, if men aren't oriented towards purpose, if they're not given direction, if they're not given challenge, I think therapy's not useful for them. And so I had to learn that with my male clients, but also with my female clients, that the first part of therapy is really affirmation, right? It's just like, I understand, I get it. People want to feel seen and understood and felt because they've never had that experience before, and that allows them to come into presence and into self-acceptance. That's the first stage. But once you're past that, men in particular really need challenge. Talking about their feelings, talking about what's going on in their life, I don't think is always useful. And so I've had to learn as I said, with my male clients to really challenge them, to really push them, and to not keep them in therapy forever. I used to just have it open ended, and now I have a finite period of time that I work with people, and then I send them on their way.
Yeah. Do you think? Because I've thought of this as a coach, not a therapist, not wholly dissimilar either, in the sense that it's the same kind of space, trying to walk somebody through a transformative experience, listening to them, edifying them, and also challenging them, not wanting to make them codependent on coach forever, because then you've really not done the job that you were hired to do. You know, the goal, I think, is to spread your wings and fly, hopefully at some point. Back to this somatic piece. How does getting into the body or through the body help people change what's going on between the ears?
Well, you can think of it as a body is the way to access the unconscious mind. So when you and I are having this conversation right now, each of us, we're in control, right? We're in our head, we're thinking, right? But once you go into the body, you can bring the person out of control or to the edge of control, right? And control is the mechanism by which we hold back our feelings. And so once you allow a client to lose a degree of control, things will begin to come out of them that surprise them, that they didn't know about, that they don't understand about themselves. It's very hard to get to that through a dialogue, through a conversation. You can, but it's trickier. So, we could sit here and talk about, your childhood or anger you might have, but if I get you up and I give you a block and have you, hit it with a bataka and say all the things that you held back saying from your father, let's say, and really go there, it's going to be a completely different experience. And the information you're going to get from that experience is going to be much different and I think deeper than talking about what happened to you in relationship to your father and maybe some of the feelings you have about it. Now, that's scary for people because people don't want to go out of control.
Right.
I don't want to go out of control, but that's where all the juice is. And so a lot of my work is creating a container of safety for people so that they feel like they can go out of control and then convincing them of the utility of it. But even for me now, every time I'm faced with the prospect of losing control, I have a lot of resistance to it. That part of me is like, my mind comes online and says, what's the point of this? You don't need to do this. But it's really just fear, right? So that's really the way I think about the somatic work and why I was drawn to it. I feel it's the most effective way to at least to process emotions. And it's interesting to me because I started this work in 2006. Nobody was doing this. These were like weird hippie workshops up at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, and I would come home and talk about it, and everybody thought I was a weirdo. And now it's everywhere. Yeah. On Instagram, you just type in somatic, and there's a million things coming up. So it's interesting to see how it's come into popular awareness, and the reason is because people see the value in it.
Yeah, you reminded me of something that happened years ago with my wife at this point. Almost feels like a different lifetime. It was before kids and everything. She went on a retreat somewhere in Colorado, the Path of Love, and she came back and it was a silent retreat unless they were in workshops. They had a lot of time to process and integrate. And she told me about this crazy thing they did where they beat the shit out of pillows. And, it was a lot of anger about this and moving that. And she said it was really hard to get into at first because you feel judged, right? It's that letting go of security. And then when it all came out, the whole dam broke and it was cathartic afterwards. And kind of like the breakdown leads to the breakthrough kind of thing. What lives there in that breakthrough? Why do we have so much resistance going there? But why, when you can get someone there, what is it about that allows them to come back more whole?
We don't want to feel our pain. That's like just the fundamental issue. Like we all have pain and we have a lot of resistance to feeling it, obviously. And the defense against pain is very often anger. But we also have a lot of fear about expressing our anger. I mean, you might do it privately, or we all, I think, in our relationships get angry, but to really get angry in front of a room full of people and to be witnessed in that is fucking vulnerable, right? And one of the reasons that I think we have a resistance to really going to our anger, to go all the way into it, is because if we go all the way into it, like all the way through it, right, and all the impulses that live in that, like what does that anger want to do? Well, it wants to annihilate, right? It wants to take out. It wants to kill, really. And what is it trying to kill? It's trying to kill the thing that's making it feel the feeling that it doesn't want to feel. That's like fundamental, right? We want to destroy the thing outside of us that is making us feel the thing inside of us that terrifies us. And so, but if you go all the way into that, like into that part of you that wants to destroy, if you let yourself experience that, that's energy in the body. And if that energy moves through you, the room that's left is just your pain. And that will take you to the heart of your pain. And if you allow yourself to experience that pain, right, which is surrender to it, let's say, you're going to be liberated. Most of us walk around trying to avoid our pain, and then we tell ourselves stories about why, or we project things out onto the world to explain it away, right? But the truth is, it's just we avoid it. And so really fundamentally, that's all I'm thinking about when I'm working with people is how do I get them to feel their pain?
Yeah.
Because I know that is the path to liberation.
It's you think that's what Rumi meant when he said the wound is where the light enters?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You said vulnerability. What's your take on men that take the stance that you should never be vulnerable, especially in front of a woman, because they'll use that against you? Vulnerability is a weakness.
Well, it depends how you define vulnerability. I don't think any of the men that actually say that believe that. I mean, maybe they have their own definition of it, but vulnerability, it's just honesty. That's all it is. It's presence. It's just being here right now with what's true for me. That's all it is. I think some men think they associate it with weakness, but weakness is really deception, right? Self-deception. And that's not trustable. So I think vulnerability is just being real and being honest. And I really don't know any man that wouldn't agree with that statement. Like, do you want to be real and honest? Of course I do. Well, that's vulnerable, right? I mean, I interviewed Andrew Tate, we talked about that, but before, and I think he's incredibly vulnerable. I think there's a part of him that's not vulnerable, but the fact that he puts himself out there and says what he thinks, I think is actually vulnerable. He's opening himself up to attack. Now, I think there's aspects of himself that are defended, if I was psychoanalyzing him. But I think the people that we admire the most are the most vulnerable, like Leonidas and in 300. I mean, he's incredibly vulnerable. And that moment he puts down his shield, right, at the end of the movie, it's like, it's so powerful because he's letting himself be vulnerable. And it's very moving, that I mean, I'll never forget that moment. He puts down the shield, as a symbol, as a metaphor, what that means. And suddenly it's like we feel more of him. We actually, like, it's in that moment that he demonstrates the most courage. So for me, vulnerability is a strength. Vulnerability is power. And it's just vulnerability, as I said, it's just being honest and real.
You mentioned Andrew Tate. That conversation you had with him, the second one in particular, was really fascinating. He had some pretty insightful things to say, and I think, yeah, you're right. Vulnerable in some ways, maybe guarded in other ways. But what's Andrew Tate like in real life?
He's a big sweetie pie.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, at least with me, I'm a little older than him, and so and he was very respectful to me. But I found him warm and friendly and gregarious and welcoming and funny and playful. He's just a big kid,
He is playful.
Yeah.
You can see that. He's cheeky.
Yeah, he's cheeky. And I think he's enjoying his life and he's having fun. And, he's been given an extraordinary gift with his intellect and his physical stature and the way he looks. I mean, he's right out of a movie or a comic book or something. Mm-hmm. And I think he knows that. Like, he has an understanding of who he is and how he impacts the world. So there is a degree of self-awareness that is really interesting. Like, he understands his power. Now, imagine having that kind of power. What do you do with it? And my sense is that he's not always sure what to do with it. I mean, which I understand. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you do when you're Andrew Tate? You're like, you have all of that. How do you wield that power? And I think that was really what I was trying to get at in the conversation with him. It's, pushing him towards, like, are you using your power effectively? Like what's next for you? Like, what fear do you have to confront? Like, is there another level? Are you not taking responsibility for certain things in your life? Like, could you step up and be more? And I found him, particularly in the interview, he was very open. And I mean, from my perspective, I understand on the outside looking in, you could look at it and say, well, he was guarded and he rationalized and he was avoiding. Okay, all of that was true, but he gave me a ton of openings. He said things, I was shocked that he said them, because he had to know that when he said that thing, that was an invitation for me to come in. Mm-hmm. And so I found him like open and willing, a lot more open and willing than a lot of the other people I've interviewed, to be honest. I mean, or just clients that I have. Obviously it was being taped, and so there's a performance to it, and both of us are storytellers, so we understand that we're creating something, so that's a part of it. But I like Andrew.
Yeah. Did you receive some backlash for doing that, especially like kind of coming from Hollywood and the popular portrayal of Andrew Tate in particular as a womanizer, a potential person that's sex trafficking girls all through Europe? And I know his stance on that. It's the Matrix trying to take him down. What was it like to step into the fire? It was relatively shortly after he got out of jail. Did you feel like that was putting your reputation on the line a little bit? It's this cancel by association thing. Did you receive backlash?
Listen, I voted for Trump twice. I was like, I'd already gone through the fire. And I was out about it. And so Hollywood already rejected me. Okay. A lot of my friends rejected me. So the time I got to Andrew Tate, nobody was surprised. It was,
okay. The one thing Tate seems to do, very well is he's got some very empowering mental models. Like one of the things he said was, "I'd rather believe what's useful than what's true." Talk to me about the power of mental models. How important is it to have those frameworks for how you perceive reality?
Well, I think he said that. I mean, he said that. That's a powerful frame, right? Can we know what's true? Probably not. I mean, we can feel it. Can we articulate it? I mean, this whole thing is a great mystery. Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense that you would create a frame inside your mind to look at reality that would give you the result that you want. And if you're getting the result that you want, then your mental model must be accurate. Now, what you want, that's a whole other question, right? Like that, there may be some distortion in that. You may not actually know what you want, or what you want may be informed by, let's say, your pain or your insecurities, right, or your self-loathing. So that's where it gets tricky. Mm-hmm. And I think we're constantly in a state of refining our mental models. But we need a structure through which we can look at the world. And that structure is generally given to us by our environment, generally unconsciously. So most of our mental models are unconscious. Most of our belief systems are unconscious, right? And that's why we experience frustration in the world. We're like, why is this always happening to me? Why am I always dating this kind of person? Why can't I ever make money? Why do all my businesses always fail? Well, probably because you have unconscious belief systems that are perpetuating themselves and that you are on some level making this manifest. So once you become aware of that, you want to begin to change your mental models. Not an easy thing to do because our identity is very attached to our mental models. They're kind of one and the same. And so in order to change your mental models, you really have to change your identity and you have to let go of the old belief systems. The problem with that is our old belief systems, right? They're what kept us safe. They're what kept us in connection and favor with our caregivers. And so it requires a kind of death, right? You know, people call it an ego death. We have to die and be reborn. And so that's why I'm somewhat skeptical of, listen, I use NLP and I've read a lot about NLP, but until you really get to the heart of what's going on inside you, the simply shifting your mindset will not be enough because that lower self part of you will always find a way to sabotage it. And so, yes, mental models are important, but doing the deep emotional work is also important.
Jung said something along the lines of, until you meet your unconscious on the inside, it will keep meeting you on the outside. Then you'll deem it fate, or something along those lines. How does a person then, if it's so scary, if the mind doesn't want to go there because it feels like it's crumbling and it's dying and nobody likes that, how does one get into the unconscious? How do we start to see what we're acting out unconsciously? What are the tools? What are the techniques? What is the awareness required?
Well, the first thing is you have to take self-responsibility, right, for everything that's happening in your life. And you have to understand that life is just a mirror. So everything that's happening to you, right, everything outside of you is just a reflection of what's going on inside of you. And so you can see your unconscious by your external environment. It's all there. The woman you're dating, the amount of money you're making, everything that's happening is just a reflection of the unconscious. Now, we don't want to do that because taking responsibility is painful. Right? It's much easier to blame the external world for our problems. So that's the first thing. Are you willing to take responsibility for everything in your life? And then once you come to that, right, then you're going to have to put yourself into a situation where you're going to confront aspects of yourself that are going to be difficult, and you know you're going to have resistance, and the only way to do that is to put yourself in situations that you can't get out of. It's it. You know, that's why for me, like a sweat lodge is so powerful. The idea of it, the concept of it, you get in this lodge, you can't get out. I mean, you can, but not really. And you're in there and it gets hot and it's uncomfortable and you're packed in there and it's dark and the drum is beating and the person is singing, and sometimes those songs can be, freak you out, and you got to deal with it. And what happens is you realize you can deal with it. If you actually sit in it, you'll get through it. And that's an incredibly empowering experience, but you need the leverage. You need the leverage, which is I can't get out of here in order to deal with it, or you will leave, right? And I say leave literally and metaphorically, because there's all kinds of ways that we can leave. Like we can disassociate, we can drink, smoke, fuck, whatever it is. There's all kinds of ways that we can leave ourselves. So we have to put ourselves in some situation where there's leverage created. That could be going to a retreat. That could be getting with a group of guys. You're a fit guy. I'm sure you're extremely disciplined, and even if you were left to your own devices, you're going to get it done. However, if you worked out with a group of guys every day,
100%.
It's just how it works. Yep. So you can't do it alone. Like you have to put yourself in situations. Otherwise, your mind will find some way to get out of it. And there's no other way.
I really love this idea of radical responsibility, taking accountability for things. The other side of that coin is the victim mentality. What do you think is causing the victim mentality to be such a virus right now?
I mean, that's a big question. I mean, it's seductive. it's very, very seductive to blame somebody else, blame a man, blame a woman, blame the system for our problems. And the issue is, there's a good argument there. You know, there's a lot of fucked up men, there's a lot of fucked up women. The system is totally corrupt. Like, I can make that argument all day long. And it's very convincing. And then I can talk to other people who feel the same way. And then we all get in this collusion together, and we feel satisfied in our righteous indignation, and it creates community, right? And then we're together. And so I think, I mean, if the real deep truth is probably the people go to victimhood when they lose God, you know? And so I grew up, God wasn't cool. And I went to Catholic school. And so, you know, it all became about the rational, the scientific, you know, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris.
Yes.
And, you know, fair play. Like, you know, they had a lot of interesting things to contribute. But I think that when you lose God, you make yourself God. The self becomes God. And I think once you're in that territory, you are very susceptible to the seduction of evil. And evil will seduce you in the place of where you can be a victim, you know, to blame somebody else. So I think once you really like find God and surrender to that, I think it's a lot harder to be seduced by this victim culture that's going on right now. And I think these things run in cycles. And so on some level, I trust it. Like, seeing it has forced me to make myself stronger. Like, and then I see where I'm seduced by it, right? It's easy for me to judge all the people out there who are making themselves victims, but dude, I make myself a victim all the fucking time, every day. Somebody cuts me off in traffic. I'm like, motherfucker. It's like, well, in that moment, I'm a victim. I'm like, you know, some can opener doesn't work and I'm complaining about it. I'm a victim to that fucking can opener. Like, so I'm doing it constantly. And so it's a reminder for me of where does that live inside me? Where do I make myself a victim? Where am I not taking responsibility? And it's forcing me to get stronger. So I don't think it's like, it's something that's out there. It's something that's inside me. And so on some level, I'm grateful for all the insanity that's going on in the world right now. It's sad, it's scary, but it's forced me to take more responsibility and to deepen my relationship with Creator.
And it's obviously necessary, or it wouldn't be happening, right?
Right.
So that's the other part of the weird, same bad trip for all of us. Like, it's obviously necessary. It's happening. The whole power follows the blame finger thing, which is either it's the patriarchy or it's the White House or it's this fucking can opener that won't work right now. That's where it's gone. And pointing it back inward is really important. I think it's empowering, because I was a victim forever. It was always somebody else's fault. And when I finally was like, oh, wait a minute, let me turn this back in on self, it was actually for the first time in my life that I was like, okay, I'm in control for a change.
Right.
There's a lot of shit that has to get done. This is going to be hard and I've got to change some stuff. But I can actually do it now, because otherwise everything else was externalized. You mentioned judgment. I'm still trying to understand this for myself. Like, when we judge another, arguably what we're doing is just judging parts of ourselves that we can't reconcile or accept. How do you make sense of that?
Well, I think that's right, what you said. I mean, when I have a client and they're in a place of judgment, you know, I try to be curious about it. The first thing I think about is that they're projecting, right? So whatever they're judging in someone else, they're probably judging in themselves. That's the first place I go. And I think that's usually true, right? And so that's the first question that I ask myself. You know, you see it mostly in relationship. Like I had a client earlier today who was really judging the neediness in his girlfriend. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, what about his neediness? Like, maybe there's a place where he has need that he feels ashamed of, or he feels is weak, and he doesn't want to bring that out. And we eventually got there, and that's where it led to. Judgment, really, if you think about it's the intention is separation, right? Which is ultimately all separation is separation from the self. So if I'm judging you, like I'm putting something on you, I'm projecting something on you. And the moment I project something on you, I'm not seeing you. I'm actually like, you're just like what I want you to be. And I lose sight of your humanity. And so anything we judge, we can't see clearly. And I try to think about that a lot, right? Because of course, I judge things all the time intuitively. But I know when I'm in a judgment, I'm in a distortion. So can I step back and just be an acceptance of everything as it is? You know, as you said, like whatever's happening in the world right now, there must be a reason for it. So if there's a reason for it, then it must be good. You know what I mean? Or at least part of the evolutionary process. You know, if I trust in that, I trust that we're always growing and evolving, even if we go into dark times. You know, there's something larger at play. And so can I just step back? Do I have the courage to just step back and look at it and just be with everything without the judgment and be in the truth of what it actually is? And I think that gives comfort because I think the truth gives comfort. The truth is not always comfortable. We don't always want the truth because it shatters some of the illusions that we have that maybe give us comfort. But ultimately, if we get there and confront it, there is a kind of a peace and an ease that we can come to. So, but we all judge, you know, and it's just being mindful and having the framework that I just described, and you just, I mean, you know, the work I do in general, I'm not trying to get anybody to a place of perfection and enlightenment. I'm just trying to give them tools to practice, right? Because life is hard, and we have a history, and we all got wounded as children, and so we all have these distortions and resentments and anger and pain and sadness and fear. Like that's in all of us, and you know, from my experience, I don't know that there are things to entirely overcome. I think we can integrate them and move on, certainly, and start to make better decisions. But if you're evolving and growing in your life, you're probably going to be challenged consistently. Yeah. And as a new challenge comes up, all your stuff is going to come up. So what I'm trying to do is just give people a framework and a set of tools so that they can meet those challenges with a little bit more awareness, consciousness, and most importantly, self-compassion, right? Because often when we lose our mind or things go sideways, the first thing we do is like, what the fuck is my problem? You know, whether we say that out loud or in our own mind, like we turn on ourselves. And if you can not judge yourself there and get curious about what's going on, like if I'm failing in my business, you know, generally the go-to is like, what's my problem? I'm no good at this. But if I can step outside myself and say, well, what's happening here? You know, because that's what I would do if I was trying to help somebody else with their business. I wouldn't judge them. Right. I just try to examine it like the way I'd look at a bunch of monkeys in a zoo. I'm just looking at them. So can I look at myself the way that I would look with just neutrality at a monkey in a zoo? And that's what I'm trying to teach people to do.
That's cool. I think as well, there's a part of us that like we teach what we need to learn kind of thing.
Yeah.
Something I've really noticed in coaching over the last 5 or 6 years is it's helped me profoundly, because in mirroring back to the client on the other side of the room or the screen, I get to see these other parts of myself and I'm like, oh, that's a gap for me too. How do you, because I think what you're saying there is, instead of just immediately going to the judgment, like, man, you're a piece of shit, it's like, what's really going on here? What need is unmet, and why is this happening? Like, talk to yourself like you would a good friend. Like, if your friend came to you with a problem, you wouldn't be like, dude, you're such a fuck up, like, you suck. You would try and like love them a little bit. And it's hard sometimes when things aren't going well. What are some better questions that people can ask there instead of immediately going to the judgment?
Well, you just asked it, what do I need? That's the first question to ask, you know. If you're in a place of distress, anxiety, fear, sadness, it's like, what do I need? What do I actually need here? And often it's just connection and comfort. You know, usually like we long for connection more than we let ourselves admit. In fact, when you ask people a series of questions, why do you want this? Why do you want that? And you keep asking, what they'll get to is connection. Almost always, like connection with others, connection with self. Who doesn't want to have more connection in their life? Feel like they're a part of something. And so generally that is what we're needing more than anything else. Other questions? What are you afraid of? What's the fear?
Ooh.
That's a question I ask my clients all the time. Like what is the actual fear? Like, if this happens, what is your image of the result, right? Like, if your business fails, or if this girl dumps you, or whatever, like, what do you imagine is going to happen? And when they talk through that fear, usually what they realize is the fear is not nearly as bad as they imagine it in their head, that they actually can survive it. But often when it's unspoken or it's unknown, it feels so big inside our consciousness that we just don't want to look at it. We don't want to deal with it. And I think fear is present in most human beings all the time, because life is not safe, ever. Right? I mean, we could be hit by a meteor right now. So it's never truly safe. And so there's that fear program that is running all the time. And so making peace with that fear, understanding what it is, and understanding that that no matter what happens, that we're going to be okay, and it's okay. And once you walk people through the questions, I think that often gives them a lot of comfort.
It's so true. I've experienced it firsthand too. I had a teacher tell me one time that, fear is like the monster under the bed. And the more you stay on top of it with the covers over your head, like, I don't want to look at it, I don't want to think about it, the bigger it grows. And at some point you have to get off the bed and look under the bed and look it in the eye to realize, oh, it's not this thing I made it out to be. But it requires an awful lot of awareness, and nothing changes without awareness, right? It's tools and groups, you said, and being around men. I know you've done some really cool, transformative, like initiatory experiences too. You mentioned one of them, a sweat lodge, but I believe you've done vision quests and sun dances. How important is it? It's important for everyone. I know the answer to that, but in particular for men as like this rite of passage, this initiation to try and seek something like that if they haven't had it.
It's been really important in my life. I didn't know how much I needed it until I started pursuing it. Particularly for me, in that it came from a lineage that is old, and there's traditions, and I didn't know how much I needed that, like needed to be anchored in something that had a long tradition, that there were generations and generations of men and women who came before me that had gone through this, and that there was a technology in it, like a real technology that had been refined and perfected. I didn't understand that. Like, the Vision Quest is a fucking technology. I mean, it's unbelievable to me, like what these people, the Native Americans, the Lakota in particular, what they figured out.
Right.
And, some of the songs are like, do it this way. Don't try to fool me. You have to do it this way. And if you do it this way, everything you pray for, you will receive. And you think, really? But when you do it that way, it like your prayers are answered. And how is that? How did they figure that out? I don't know. But being in the presence of something that was figured out, but there's a mystery to it. You're surrendered to the mystery of life. You're in that thing. Now, how do you get in touch with that? It's immense amount of suffering, which makes sense. right? Like you got to break down the ego. Well, the only way you're going to break down the ego is through suffering. And so you put you out in the blanket for 4 days, 4 nights, no food or water. You're suffering and you're alone with your mind. And, you know, there's only one way out, and that's surrender to God. It's just the only way. And that's the lesson. That's the teaching. And once you surrender to that, then this whole field opens up and all of this intelligence comes through and you're just sitting there in awe. You're like, oh, wow. Okay. I get it now. And then, ironically, you begin to long for the experience, you know? So I'm going to Sundance in July, and I've got 2 under my belt, and I can't wait.
Just explain what that is for the listener really quick, the Sundance.
It's 4 days. You're dancing in an arbor, no food or water, and, you know, under the hot sun in an arbor with the, I mean, there's a lot of elements to the ceremony, but it's not easy.
No.
You're out there, exposed, moving, and in the elements, and the no food or water is it's pretty intense. And you feel, you know, I wouldn't say death, but it takes you somewhere that I've never been before, a place that nothing else could take, not psychedelics, nothing. And, you know, there's also an element of piercing where they cut into your chest, and there's, you make a flesh offering to the tree, which is pretty intense. And then the drumming and the singing is going on all day long, and you're with a group of people. You're in another vortex. And so things open up, that are beyond your comprehension, and then you realize that this whole thing is just like it's a facade. It's the Maya. None of this is real. It's that what they're showing you is actually, or what you see, what you feel, what you experience. That's the thing that's real. And so, despite the fact that it's incredibly challenging and sometimes terrifying, I feel in me a longing to go back, an excitement about it, because I know what I'm going to experience there, and I know what's on the other side of that, and it's just so deep and powerful and joyful, and it gets you to the truth, or at least, I don't know, the truth, but a deeper sense of truth, which is, you know, as I said earlier, it's just the most comforting thing.
It's so interesting, right, that the most comforting thing and the closest approximation to the truth is found through immense suffering. And to many people, like when I hear you talk about this, and I've gone through certain Lakota ceremonies, never done a Sundance, but Vision Quest and sweat lodges and ceremonies and such, it's been vastly transformational for me. But when I hear you talk about that, there's a part of me that's like, oh shit, that's heavy. And like a part of the warrior in me that's like, yeah, I want that too. And I know there's some people listening to it saying like, what on earth? You couldn't pay me to do that. I'm going to sit here and scroll TikTok for 4 hours.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
It's not that bad, right? Is it?
Yeah, it's fine. You just deal with it. You just deal with it.
What is that in a person that draws them to that, the suffering, the surrender, the mystery, the wanting to dance with that, versus the person that seems completely okay, cubicle slaving and scrolling on Instagram and eating the slop and just like, yeah, no, you guys are crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bias. I'm just like, everybody should do this, or do some version of it for yourself. But I guess maybe I'm extreme. You know, although I'm, you know, here in Austin, Texas, you're surrounded by people who are pretty extreme in this kind of thing. I don't think it's for everybody. I don't think everybody's meant to do it. I think you just need a small section of the population to do it, and they have that experience. But I think it goes out. Like, you know, the awareness we're all connected, you know, so you don't need every single person to go through that experience in order to transform the consciousness. You just need a small group of people to do it. And if they do it and they can hold that, the energy will dissipate out, so that everybody that you come into contact with will have some kind of, whether they're conscious of it or not, some experience of you. I mean, what I realized with, the work that I do, because at first when you start practicing psychotherapy, like you feel like I have to say exactly the right thing. I have to have the perfect intervention. I have to frame their problems so that they can understand. And you put that pressure on yourself. And then you realize that all you ever have to do is be present with the person. That's it. Like, so if I can just be still and present and listening, literally they can transform through that. And so the work is not for me to, master the skill. The work is for me to be able to come more and more present within myself. And that, in some sense, that's why I'm doing all the things that I'm doing, because the more that the layers that I peel off myself, and the closer that I get to the truth, which is God, creator, the more present I can be. And so the more present I can be in myself, the more I think that I can help the world without having to say or do anything.
Right. That's very powerful. Yeah. How do you know when you're closer to that state? How's your day-to-day existence different? What do you feel? What do you think in the texture of your thoughts?
Just a deep sense of trust and relaxation. A knowing. I was watching this video about a guy who had a near-death experience, and he talked about when he was in the death part of it, in the white light, that he knew everything. He's like, you know everything. And I think if you can come all the way present, like, which I don't think many of us do very often, I think we do know everything. I think that we're capable of that in some way. So I guess what I'm saying is there's a kind of knowing. And so I know when I'm present, I'm not worried about anything. I'm just with what's happening. And if something goes wrong, or somebody's upset at me, or I've made a mistake, I trust it. I'm like, like I trust the perfection of everything that's happening. Now, the place that I learned that, and the place where I practice it, is in my workshops, because I make mistakes in my workshops all the time, of course. And if you make yourself bad because you've made a mistake, or somebody feels hurt by something you said, or because you missed them in some way, and you take yourself out, it's over. Like, everything's over. So the mindset shift for me was, everything that's happening, I have to trust it. I have to believe in what's happening. And that faith, because that's what it is, I have faith in the moment, transcends the fear in the room. And once that fear is transcended, that's what creates a safety for people to be able to go deeper and get more presence. So it's really, I guess ultimately, it's just a deep sense of faith.
As a space holder and a therapist for many people, I'm sure you encounter a lot of friction in people's relationships. What do you think that men get wrong the most in relationships with their romantic partners?
What do men get wrong? What do I get wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Tell me what I'm doing, David.
Your perfect track record is meaningless. They don't care. The feminine is in the moment. And so, and they feel when you're not in the moment. And so when they're acting out, it's a signal. Don't, I know this may sound offensive to some of the women listening, but and I don't mean it women, but the feminine doesn't say what they mean exactly. And I don't think any of us really do, but they're trying to communicate something. And so I think that your primary responsibility as a man is to be present, because presence creates safety. And then in that safety, the feminine can relax. And so if your woman is unhappy with you or acting out in some way, it's a pretty good indication that you're not present. And so that's all you really have to worry about, right? You don't have to be something for her. You don't have to even please her. I think you should not be focusing on pleasing your woman. I think that's a mistake. Of course, you should be kind and generous and all of that. But if you're present, you will please her. Like, so focus on the presence and everything else will take care of itself. And part of presence, as we talked about earlier in the conversation, is being vulnerable. And so I think men also make the mistake of, yes, I don't think it's good to come home and share all your problems with your woman. This happened at work and this fucking guy ripped me off and blah, 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 blah. I don't think that's useful. But to come home and say, I had a hard day, I'm upset, I'm scared, and just be in that, right? So then you're present, right? And if let her have her reaction, but like, you have to be real. You have to be, because she can feel it if you're not. She can feel it. So you have to get really real. And and if men are honest, you're afraid a lot of the time, because it's a lot of pressure on men, right? Like, to succeed or to provide and protect. It's a competitive world.
It's exactly what I was going to say, right? As you're saying, I fully agree, because I've had glimpses of it. The presence is the superpower. But you say that to a guy and he's like, well, David, how can I be present, man? I'm trying to make the next friggin' thing work, the bill to keep the month, and I'm worried about this, and I want to keep a roof over our heads, and I can't be present because I'm worried about all this stuff, and I'm protecting this family, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Well, it's a practice. I understand all that. And I have the same, I'm battling with it all the time because I get lost in the doing. And there's a kind of, I don't know, zone that I get into when I'm accomplishing, doing, creating, building, that feels really, really good. And sometimes I have a hard time getting out of it, and I'll come home and there's my lady and she wants my attention and she wants, soft time. And it's hard for me to get out of it. And sometimes I resent her for that. Like, you're pulling me out of this place that I'm in that feels good. But then I think it's probably good for me to relax. It's probably like, maybe I need to trust this. And then if I can let down and give her what she needs, it's probably actually what I need. But there's some fear that if I let down and let go into this sort of softer, tender place, I'm going to like lose whatever that edge is that feels good. But that's the illusion, right? And so it's finding the balance between those two things. I mean, the truth is we have a masculine and feminine in all of us, inside of us. And as a man, you have a feminine side. And you have a doing aspect of your being, and you have a being aspect of your being. And if you don't tend to the being, which is where you're going to find the presence, if you don't tend to that, whether it's through your own activities or through in relationship with the woman, you're not going to be balanced. And so you're going to be less effective in how you're operating out in the world of men.
Like, integrating that whole range is very, very important. What would you make of the statement, being born male doesn't make you a man? You must become a man.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. I think, well, again, I can only speak, I don't like making generalized statements about, I mean, I guess I've made a lot of them here, but I can speak for myself. I know that I found myself through challenge, through being tested, through overcoming obstacles, through, climbing the literal and metaphoric mountains. Also by having my heart broken, by being humiliated, by failing. You need to be in the game, and you got to get involved. I think if you're a man, you have to risk. I think that's actually a thing that I do with my clients all the time. It's like, make a list of all the risks that you have to take, and like every week, take a risk, whatever that is, large or small. Because I think you can't know yourself unless you put yourself in a situation where you're challenged, where you're at the edge of your capacity, where you're not certain that whether you're going to succeed or fail. Like, you have to feel that. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why, men love to engage in competition. The Super Bowl, it's like, I want to not know whether we're going to win or lose. I want to feel that. And I'm not going to know actually how strong I am unless I'm, feel the competition with another man and feel their strength. That's the only place I can really find my own. So, and that is uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. It's really uncomfortable. I mean, just even talking about it, it's like there's a part of me that wants to avoid all that, but that's where all the juice is. And so, getting back to these initiation rites, I think it really is important for men. And I understand maybe the pendulum did have to swing, and that men needed to learn to become softer and more in touch with their emotions. I think that's true. I mean, that's what I've been doing, and that's essentially, what it is that I'm teaching. Because if you think about like the species, we're kind of out of survival mode, really. Like, you think
like
about
a hierarchy of needs kind of deal.
Yeah, like we're so maybe some of the qualities that we needed to cultivate to get here are no longer useful, or we can bring in more balance, and that there is an evolution. It doesn't mean that we have to get rid of all of it, because I still think there's that primal part of us that has to be satisfied and is still necessary. But the argument that I would make, and it's the argument that I made to Tate, it's like, you're not giving anything up by getting softer, bro. Mm-hmm. Like, the sword is always there for you to use. But you don't have to use it for everything all the time. Like, there's other tools in the toolkit, and if you can become more present with what you're actually feeling, and allow yourself to be more vulnerable, allow yourself to not be so isolated within yourself, if that makes sense, right? Like, to not hold on inside yourself, like to let that part of you to be seen, to be known to yourself and to others without shame. I think you become more whole, you become more complete. I know that you have more power, you have more capacity, and you can still bash heads and kick ass.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that feeling of holding it all in and the deep sense of shame is really contributing globally to the mental health struggles that we feel, but in particular for men. Suicide is the number one killer for men in England under the age of 40. It's crazy. I'm not quite sure of the statistics in the US, but it's just as dire. And I think it's that hopeless sense of like, I'm desperately alone and I can't voice this because it's a weakness again or something like that. What would you say or encourage someone to do as some closing thoughts if they are struggling, if they are feeling that? What's something tangible we can leave the audience with to think about, do, action?
Well, that they're not alone. Every man I know has feelings of doubt and fear and shame. Fear of not being enough, fear of not measuring up, fear of being excluded. I mean, I went to a thing on last Monday, got invited, group of guys, and I was like, oh, I hope these guys like me.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
I want to be included. Like, and then when it was over, I was like, oh. So it's like, and I noticed it. It's like, oh yeah, I have this fear. Like, I don't want to be excluded. Like, I want to be part of these guys. And it was even though I've been around and have a degree of confidence, there was still that young part of me that was like scared that I wasn't going to be accepted. So I guess what I'm saying is that everything you're going through, if you're struggling, is normal, that all men face this. And I think, the best thing that you can do is to find a group of men where you can share your inner feelings with. Like, you have to get it out. And because especially you can do it online, but like some group that's intentional, and they're everywhere now. Mm-hmm. There's so many amazing men's groups and organizations. It's very easy to find and to not give up. Maybe you try one and it's not your thing, but try another. Keep finding it, because you need to get in a group of men that are trying to understand themselves in a deeper way, that are moving in the direction of wholeness and healing and purpose, and trying to better themselves. Because, that's really it. What else are we doing? We're always just trying to get better. Why are you going to the gym? Mm-hmm. You're trying to get stronger. And because why are you trying to build your business? Because it's not the money, it's not the abs, it's actually the process of doing that is the thing. And so as long as you're moving in the direction of growth, you'll be fine. It's not hopeless. And stop smoking weed, get off the porn, put down the phone. Like, you gotta have, otherwise you're hooked in.
Yeah. The things that we use to just numb the uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah.
And look, and I love it. I think it's a really important message. And it's funny. I know how you feel about this, but 10 years ago, I would have laughed at it. Like, I'm not sitting around no fire singing Kumbaya with the bros, like, that's gay or whatever it is. And now it's like, I do this, and I can't tell you how much it's transformed me and how much it's helped me and how much it's transformed the other men in my life. And the rising tide lifts all boats. You got to put yourself around the people that are going to challenge you and lift you up, and you got to share some of that stuff sometimes. And it's not weakness. And the process is where all the juice is, man. We'll finish with another Andrew Tateism, because he said, having things isn't fun. Getting things is what's fun.
Right.
It's the journey, man.
Exactly.
It's the journey. Exactly. I don't really care that much anymore what the meat suit looks like. I enjoy taming the inner bitch. I enjoy overcoming. I enjoy the process of how long it takes me to add 10 pounds to a back squat, because that tells a story. It represents the overcoming and the discipline and the struggle. And we're purpose-built creatures, like you said. So thank you very much for sharing. I do want to offer you the floor to tell people about the spaces that you've created online and where people can go to keep up with everything that you do.
DavidSutcliffe.com. All my stuff is there. I just launched School for Kings. So it's an 8-week program in what I'm calling emotional mastery. And it's really just about building a kind of framework to understand ourselves emotionally, and trying to appeal to the men who probably won't go to therapy, mm-hmm. but know they need something. And so I'm really excited about that. And a lot of my focus now is geared towards men, because it just feels like that's where there's a need. And I love working with men. And School for Kings, you can check that out, davidsutcliffe.com. Thank you.
Amen, brother. Thank you. Fam, we'll see you next week on the show. Peace. All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.